All right, let's dive right in. Today, we are talking about what might be the single most terrifying 13 days in all of human history, a time when the entire world was staring down the barrel of a nuclear war. This is the Cuban Missile Crisis. So picture this. It's a Tuesday morning, October 16th, 1962, and suddenly, the highest levels of the U.S. government are facing a reality that's been secretly developing just 90 miles off the Florida coast. This moment kicks off a chain reaction that pushes the world's two superpowers, the US and the Soviet Union, right to the edge. The big question is, how on earth did we get here? It all started with these grainy black and white pictures. They were taken by a U-2 spy plane flying at super high altitude, and they showed without a doubt that the Soviets were building ballistic missile sites in Cuba. I mean, can you imagine being President Kennedy seeing these photos for the first time? The Cold War just went from cold to boiling hot in an instant. And for the next 13 days, a secret group of his advisors would be working around the clock trying to figure a way out of this. Now, to really get a feel for the stakes, we're going to jump right into the middle of the action. We'll start at the moment of discovery. Then we'll rewind a bit to see how this all started. Then we'll walk through those insane 13 days, uncover the secret deal that saved everyone, and finally, look at the aftermath, what you might call the nuclear hangover. Okay, so the photos are real. President Kennedy immediately gets his most trusted advisors together into a top-secret group that would later be known as XCOM. Their job? Figure out what to do and do it fast. And the options they came up with? Well, they were a terrifying mix of doing nothing and starting World War III. I mean, just look at this list. It's wild. Doing nothing? That was a non-starter. It would have made the US look incredibly weak. Diplomacy? Probably way too slow. A full-on invasion, which the military brass was all for, could have triggered an immediate and devastating Soviet response, maybe in Berlin. Kennedy was really worried about that. So the conversation started to narrow down to two main ideas: a surgical airstrike to take out the missiles, or a naval blockade to stop any more from getting to Cuba. But listen, to really understand how they got stuck between a rock and a hard place like this, we've got to rewind. This crisis didn't just pop up out of thin air. No way. It was the result of years of Cold War tension, of one side trying to one-up the other, and of some really aggressive moves from both superpowers. And this timeline really tells the story, doesn't it? It's this constant tit for tat. The US puts missiles in the UK, Italy, and Turkey, basically pointing nukes right at Moscow. Then there's the Bay of Pigs invasion, a total disaster that made Kennedy look weak and inexperienced. The Soviet leader Nikita Khrushchev saw that and got, maybe I can push this young president around. And all this time, a secret war called Operation Mongoose is being waged against Cuba. So if you're the Soviets or the Cubans, putting missiles in Cuba starts to look like a pretty smart defensive play. And what's fueling all this tension? Politics, of course. There was all this talk about a so-called missile gap, with politicians, including Kennedy himself, claiming the US was falling behind the Soviets. But the reality? It was the exact opposite. The US had a massive, overwhelming nuclear advantage. But Khrushchev was a master of bluffing. He famously bragged about building missiles like sausages, and this created a public perception that the Soviets were stronger than they were. So putting missiles in Cuba, it was a huge gamble to try and change the strategic reality overnight. And we really can't skip over this part. Operation Mongoose, this wasn't some minor spy game. It was a full-blown campaign of US-backed terrorism and sabotage inside Cuba. And look at that goal for October 1962, open revolt and overthrow of the communist regime. That's the exact same month the missile crisis blew up. This constant pressure from the US is a huge reason why Castro and Khrushchev thought an American invasion was right around the corner. Okay, so with that crucial backstory, let's jump back to October 1962. After days of secret, intense debate, Kennedy's team decides on their plan. Not an invasion, not an airstrike, but a naval blockade. Although they were very careful to call it a quarantine, since a blockade is technically an act of war. And now, the whole world was about to find out just how close to the edge it really was. To really feel the tension rising, you gotta understand the DEFCON scale. Think of it like a threat meter. DEFCON 5 is just normal, everyday peace. On October 22nd, the US military jumped to DEFCON 3. But then 4 days later, it got even more serious. The military was ordered to DEFCON 2. Let me be clear about what that means. It's the step right before all-out nuclear war. Nuclear-armed B-52 bombers were in the air 24/7, ready to go. It's the highest this alert level has ever been in US history. So on the night of October 22nd, Kennedy goes on national television and just lays it all out. He shows the proof, he announces the quarantine, and then he delivers this absolutely chilling warning. He's saying point blank, if a single missile is launched from Cuba, we will consider it an attack by the Soviet Union itself, and we will respond with everything we've got. The secret was out. The whole world was holding its breath. As Soviet ships sailed closer and closer to that quarantine line, the two leaders were frantically sending messages back and forth. And in one of his letters, Khrushchev used this powerful metaphor. He said, "You have tied the knot of war." He knew that both of them were pulling the world closer and closer to total disaster. And you can feel in his words that he's starting to look for a way to loosen that knot before it's too late. But the very next day, October 27th, a day that will forever be known as Black Saturday, that knot was pulled dangerously tight. A Soviet missile shot down an American U-2 spy plane over Cuba, killing the pilot. Kennedy's own military advisors were demanding that he retaliate immediately, just like he'd promised he would. The pressure to attack was immense. This was it. This was the moment it could have all gone wrong. And if you can believe it, at the exact same time, an even more dangerous situation was playing out completely hidden, deep under the ocean. The U.S. Navy had found a Soviet submarine, B-59, and was dropping small depth charges near it, not to destroy it, but to signal it to come to the surface. But here's the problem. The sub was too deep to get radio signals. The crew had no idea what was going on. For all they knew, World War III had already started. And this story is just unbelievable. That sub was armed with a nuclear torpedo. The captain, convinced they were under attack, wanted to launch it. To do that, he needed two other senior officers to agree. The political officer said yes, but the third man, Vasily Arkhipov, said no. He argued against it, he calmed everyone down, and he refused to give his consent. A single act of defiance from one man very likely prevented a nuclear strike on the U.S. fleet, which would have triggered an unimaginable nuclear holocaust. Absolutely incredible. Okay, so after the absolute chaos of Black Saturday, with the world literally seconds from war, how did they solve this thing? Well, through a series of frantic, secret back-channel talks, they finally found a way out. But the deal they made had two parts, the one everyone knew about and a secret part that was hidden for years. So here's what the world was told. The Soviets agreed to take their missiles out of Cuba, and in return, the U.S. promised it would never invade Cuba. Simple enough, right? It let President Kennedy look strong, like he had stared down the Soviets and won. But here was the secret part. Kennedy's brother, Robert, quietly told the Soviet ambassador that the U.S. would also remove its nuclear missiles from Turkey and Italy. This was the key. It gave Khrushchev a way to save face, but because it was a secret, it made him look like he'd just given in to the Americans. So on October 28th, the world breathed a collective sigh of relief as Khrushchev announced the missiles were coming out. The immediate danger was gone. But the shock of the event? Well, that would change the Cold War forever. It had a huge impact on the leaders, the countries, and global politics for years to come. And the consequences were huge. For one, they set up the famous hotline, a direct line of communication between Moscow and Washington to prevent this kind of thing from happening again. For Khrushchev, the public humiliation of the secret deal was a big reason he was kicked out of power a couple of years later. Fidel Castro was furious. He felt like he'd just been a pawn in their game. But the shared terror of the crisis also scared both leaders straight, and it led to the first real arms control treaty. On the flip side, for the Kennedy administration, the win made them feel like they could solve any problem with tough resolve, a feeling that would have tragic consequences in places like Vietnam. So when you boil it all down, the world was saved by people. By tense talks, secret deals, and the incredible courage of one naval officer who refused to push the button. And it leaves us with a pretty terrifying question for today, right? In our world of AI, cyber attacks, and weapons that travel faster than sound, would we even have the time for the human element to step in and pull us back from the brink? Thanks so much for joining us for this deep dive into the Cuban Missile Crisis. If you want to get more of the backstory, you should definitely check out our other explainers on the Bay of Pigs and the Berlin Wall crisis. And of course, if you want to keep untangling complex moments in history, make sure you subscribe to The Explainer. We'll see you for the next one.